A young woman marked by silence is led by a mysterious herd of horses to an ancient secret that could save the world's balance. But the true challenge is only just beginning. The sun was setting on the horizon of Colorado, painting the sky with orange hues that blended with the scattered clouds. Emily adjusted her backpack as her feet kicked up small clouds of dust on the road leading to Salem. Her brown eyes, though tearful, reflected the determination of someone who had made an irreversible decision. The 28-year-old carried only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, a well-worn notebook, and the last photographs she had of her family. In her chest, the weight of recent losses felt heavier than the baggage on her back. Her fingers, unconsciously, touched the small silver pendant her grandmother had given her, a miniature horse that always made her think of the mysterious stories the old woman used to tell about Salem. The wind blew stronger, carrying with it the distinctive scent of the Colorado plains. Emily stopped for a moment, closing her eyes to feel the breeze on her face. Since the childhood accident that had left her voiceless, she had learned to perceive the world differently, more intensely, as if each sense tried to compensate for the silence that accompanied her. Her tears began to fall silently, mixing with the dust on the path. It was hard not to think about everything she had left behind in Chicago: her apartment, her job as an illustrator, the few friends she had managed to keep after so many changes. But something stronger was calling her to Salem, a force she couldn't explain, only feel. It was then that the first whinny cut through the air. Emily opened her eyes, startled, and her heart nearly stopped at what she saw. A herd of horses had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, emerging from the vegetation as if made of mist and twilight light. At the front of the group, a majestic brown mare watched her with deep, inexplicably wise eyes. The animals began to move in a perfect circle around her, their hooves kicking up more dust, creating a golden veil that danced in the light of the setting sun. Emily remained still, feeling her heart beat in rhythm with the horse's trot. There was no fear in her chest, only a growing sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The brown mare approached, her muzzle gently touching Emily's shoulder. The touch was like an electric current that ran through her entire body, and for a brief moment, she swore she heard a voice, ancient and melodic, echoing in her mind. The mare stepped back a few paces and nodded her head toward a direction Emily hadn't noticed before. There, partially hidden by the vegetation, was a narrow trail that wound through the trees. The last rays of sunlight created a play of light and shadow that seemed to invite Emily to follow. The herd began to move in that direction, and Emily, as if hypnotized, followed the animals. The trail led them for about 15 minutes, gently ascending until it opened into a circular clearing. The sky was already beginning to darken, and the first stars appeared timidly. In the center of the space, bathed in the silvery light of the rising moon, was a rock formation that immediately captured Emily's attention. The rock, about 2 meters tall, was covered in carved symbols that seemed to pulse under the moonlight. Some resembled elements of nature, spirals suggesting the movement of wind, ripples that made her think of water, shapes that resembled dancing flames. Emily approached, fascinated, her fingers delicately tracing the outlines of the inscriptions. It was then that her fingers found something different, a metallic object, partially covered in moss. Carefully, she removed it from the rock, revealing an ancient key, its surface marked with the same kinds of symbols that covered the stone. The key was heavy and had a rustic appearance, but something about it felt strangely familiar, as if Emily had seen it before, perhaps in a forgotten dream. When she looked up from the key, she realized she was alone again. The horses had disappeared, as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving only the marks of their hooves on the ground of the clearing as proof of their passage. Emily tucked the key into her jacket pocket, her heart still racing from the inexplicable events she had just experienced. The sky was now completely dark, dotted with stars that seemed to watch her with curiosity. Emily knew she needed to find a place to spend the night in Salem, but something told her that her true journey was only just beginning. That key, she sensed, was much more than a simple object found by chance. It was the first step in a story that would change her life forever. If this story has intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from, and let's continue. The morning arrived with the gentle touch characteristic of the historic towns of Colorado. Emily had found a small inn the night before, where she slept restlessly, her dreams filled with horses galloping under a starry sky and mysterious symbols dancing before her eyes. The key, now resting on her bedside table, seemed to emit its own glow in the morning light. After a simple breakfast, Emily decided to explore the cobblestone streets of Salem. The town seemed to have stepped straight out of an 18th century postcard, with its Baroque churches and colonial mansions painted in vibrant colors. As she walked, she couldn't help but notice how water was present everywhere, in the historic fountains, the old waterspouts and the soft sounds echoing through the alleys. It was when she passed a peculiar house that something caught her attention. The wrought iron gate was slightly ajar, and through it she could see a lush garden where various species of flowers grew in apparent disorder, yet with an inexplicable harmony. What truly captured her gaze, however, were the several horse figurines, scattered throughout the garden, all made of different materials: wood, metal, stone. "I've been waiting for you, Emily." The soft yet firm voice made Emily turn quickly. A lady stood near the gate, her white hair braided intricately and cascading down her back. Her deep green eyes seemed to carry centuries of wisdom. Emily took a step back, startled. How did this woman know her name? The lady smiled gently. "Don't be afraid, dear. I'm Madame Eleanor, but many know me as the guardian of horses. The spirits of the elements warned me of your arrival." She made an inviting gesture. "Come in, we have much to discuss." Emily hesitated for a moment, but something in Madame Eleanor's serene presence made her feel safe. Besides, the mention of horses piqued her curiosity. Could this woman have some connection to the events of the previous night? The interior of the house was as fascinating as the garden. Crystals of different colors hung from the windows, creating small rainbows that danced across the walls. On a center table, an ancient map of Salem lay open, marked with symbols reminiscent of those on the rock in the clearing. "You found the key, didn't you?" Madame Eleanor asked as she poured tea into antique porcelain cups. Emily nodded, pulling the object from her pocket. The lady took the key with reverence, her fingers tracing the inscriptions with familiarity. "This key belonged to your grandmother, you know?" Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Quickly she grabbed her notebook and wrote, "How did you know my grandmother?" Madame Eleanor smiled again, but this time there was a note of sadness in her expression. "Your grandmother and I were part of something greater, something that dates back to time immemorial. We are known as the Elemental Guardians, protectors of the natural balance of the world." The lady stood up and walked to an old bookshelf, from which she retrieved a leather-bound book. As she opened it, Emily saw page after page of detailed illustrations, showing people performing extraordinary feats, controlling fire, moving earth, commanding the winds. Each guardian has a special connection to one of the fundamental elements: water, fire, earth, or air. Your grandmother was a water guardian, just like you, Emily. Your silence is not a limitation, it is a gift. It is the mark of your deep connection to water, the element that needs no words to communicate. Emily unconsciously touched her throat, recalling the accident from her childhood. She had always considered her muteness a disability, something that set her apart from others. Could it be possible that there was a greater purpose behind her condition? "The strange events you experienced yesterday, the horses, the clearing, the key were only the beginning," continued Madame Eleanor. "The horses are messengers of the elements, and they brought you here because we need you. The balance is being threatened, and new guardians are being called." The woman paused, her gaze growing more intense. "But you need to know that you are not alone on this journey. There are others like you in Salem, young people who are also discovering their gifts. Liam, the Fire Guardian, Sophia, the Earth Guardian, and Ethan, the Air Guardian. Together you will face challenges that will test not only your powers, but also your ability to trust one another." Emily felt her heart beating faster with each revelation. It was too much to process: her grandmother, the guardians, her own powers. She picked up her notebook again and wrote a single word: "How?" "The key you found is only the beginning," replied Madame Eleanor, standing up and walking to a window. "It will guide you to the other guardians and to the sacred places in Salem." where the power of the elements is strongest. But remember, the true power lies not in the key but in your heart. The rest of the day passed like a dream for Emily. After leaving Madame Eleanor's house, she wandered through the streets of Salem, her mind trying to process everything she had discovered. The key in her pocket seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if responding to her tumultuous thoughts. As evening fell, Emily found a bench in the town's central square, where she could observe the majestic St. Anthony's Cathedral. The sky began to darken and heavy clouds approached rapidly. It was then that she noticed something strange. The shadows around her seemed to move unnaturally, as if they had a life of their own. A cold wind swept through the square, making the leaves on the trees dance violently. Emily stood up alarmed when she realized that some people were running for shelter. The sky, once merely cloudy, was now almost black, and lightning began to streak across the horizon in a pattern that seemed almost coordinated. The key in her pocket began to grow warm. When Emily took it out, she noticed that the symbols engraved on its surface glowed with a bluish light. As if it had a will of its own, the key began to pull her in a specific direction. Remembering Madame Eleanor's words about following her intuition, Emily let herself be guided. The rain began to fall, first in thick, sparse drops, then in dense curtains that turned the streets into small rivers. Strangely, although Emily was in the midst of the storm, the raindrops seemed to avoid her body, as if an invisible force repelled them. She looked at her hands, amazed, and saw small spheres of water floating around her, responding to the movements of her fingers. The key led her to a smaller church, farther from the center. At the door, a tall, slender young man watched the storm with concern. When he saw Emily approaching, his eyes widened in recognition. "You too?" he asked, raising his own hand, where a small flame danced, shielded from the rain. "I'm Liam," he introduced himself as he opened the church door for them to enter. "Madame Eleanor told me you would come. You must be Emily, the water guardian." Emily nodded, reaching for her notebook to communicate, but Liam gently interrupted her. "No need to write. Madame Eleanor explained your special gift to us." Inside the church, two other people were waiting. A young woman with tan skin and curly hair sat on the first pew, her hands playing with small stones that floated and spun in the air. Beside her, a teenager no older than 16 manipulated a small current of air, making it spiral around. "This is Sophia," Liam introduced, pointing to the young woman, "our Earth Guardian. And that's Ethan, the youngest in the group, our Air Guardian." The two waved at Emily, who returned a shy smile. "The storm isn't natural," Sophia said, her deep, melodious voice echoing in the sacred space. "Something is disturbing the balance of the elements. Can you feel it?" Emily could. There was a sense of unease in the air, as if nature itself was in conflict. Ethan approached one of the windows, his youthful expression marked by worry. "The shadows. They're moving wrong. Madame Eleanor warned us about this, remember? These are the first signs." Emily took out her notebook and quickly wrote, "Signs of what?" The other three exchanged worried glances before Liam answered, "Of Malachi's awakening. He was a guardian like us, but he chose to use his powers to cause destruction. Madam, Eleanor believes he's trying to return." A particularly loud thunderclap shook the church walls, making everyone jump. The keys each of them carried began to glow simultaneously, their symbols pulsing in sync. Emily felt a connection forming between them, as if an invisible thread bound them together. "We need to do something," Sophia declared, standing up. "The storm is getting stronger, and if we don't control it, it could cause destruction in the city." Emily closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation of the water around her. She could feel every raindrop, every stream forming in the streets. Without much thought, she raised her hands in a fluid motion. To her surprise, the rain responded to her command, its intensity gradually decreasing. Liam joined her, using his control over fire to warm the air and disperse the denser clouds. Ethan directed the air currents, helping to push the storm away, while Sophia used her powers to ensure the soaked ground wouldn't give way anywhere in the city. Working together, the four young guardians managed to calm the storm. When the last thunder echoed in the distance, a reverent silence fell over them. Emily looked at her new companions, feeling a mix of awe and belonging. For the first time since she had lost her voice, she didn't feel alone. "This was just the beginning," Liam said, his voice serious. "Malachi is testing his strength and ours. We need to learn to work together to understand our powers." He looked at each of them before continuing. "Madame Eleanor said our keys are part of something greater, that there are secrets in Salem we need to uncover." Emily nodded, her hand tightening around the ancient key. Through the church windows, the sky began to clear, the last clouds dissipating to reveal an extraordinary sunset. Vibrant colors painted the horizon, as if nature itself was celebrating the new Guardian's first victory. But as they watched the spectacle, none of them noticed the shadows moving on the church walls, briefly forming the silhouette of a dark figure watching them with malevolent interest. The battle for the harmony of the elements was only just beginning. The next morning, the four Guardians gathered at Madame Eleanor's house. The garden, still damp from the previous night's storm, glistened under the morning sun. The horse figurines seemed to watch them with renewed interest, their shadows dancing on the walls as the leaves swayed in the wind. "You proved your worth." "To yesterday," Madame Eleanor said, serving herbal tea in different cups for each of them, blue for Emily, red for Liam, green for Sophia, and white for Ethan. "But controlling the elements is only the first step. You need to learn the history of the Guardians, understand what's at stake." The lady walked to her bookshelf and retrieved a new book, even older than the previous one. Its yellowed pages contained detailed illustrations of rituals and symbols, many of them identical to those engraved on their keys. "The Guardians have existed since the first man realized his connection to nature," she explained, carefully turning the pages. "In every generation, 4 young ones are chosen to maintain the balance. But there was a time when that balance was almost destroyed." Emily noticed a particular illustration showing a shadowy figure surrounded by chaos. Her heart raced as she recognized the same patterns from the storm the night before. "Malachi was a fire guardian many generations ago," Madame Eleanor continued, her voice heavy with sorrow. "He believed the elements should be dominated, not respected. His ambition corrupted him, turning him into a shadow entity that seeks to disrupt the natural harmony." Ethan, the youngest, shifted uneasily in his chair. "But how do we stop him? We barely know how to use our powers." "That's why you must train," the lady replied, standing up. "Come with me." She led them through the garden to a door almost hidden by flowering vines. Beyond it, a stone staircase spiraled downward, illuminated by crystals emitting a soft glow. At the bottom of the stairs, they found an impressive circular chamber. The space was divided into 4 distinct sections, each representing an element: a source of crystalline water, an eternal bonfire, an inner garden filled with crystals and minerals, and an area where the air moved in visible currents. At the center, an ancient stone circle bore the same symbols found on the keys. "This is the Sanctum of Elements," Madame Eleanor announced. "Here, you will learn the true nature of your gifts." Over the next few hours, each Guardian explored their connection to their element. Emily discovered she could not only control water, but also sense it in all its forms, in the air, in plants, even in the bodies of her companions. Her muteness, as Madame Eleanor had suggested, seemed to amplify her sensitivity. Liam demonstrated precise control over fire, creating intricate shapes with the flames. But when he tried to increase the intensity of his power, his hands began to tremble. "Fire also burns the one who controls it," he admitted, and Emily sensed there was a painful story behind those words. Sophia had a deep connection with the earth, able to feel the vibrations of the ground and communicate with crystals. However, Emily noticed how she hesitated whenever Malachi was mentioned, her eyes filling with a concern that seemed more personal than general. Ethan, despite his youth, showed a natural talent for controlling the air. "It's like music," he explained, creating small whirlwinds that danced around them. Each current of air has its own rhythm, its own melody. As they trained, their keys began to react again, glowing more intensely as their powers harmonized. It was Sophia who first noticed the pattern. "Look, the symbols. They change when we work together." Emily approached the center of the chamber, where the stone circle began to emit a soft light. Following her instinct, she placed her key in a recess that seemed made exactly for it. The others followed suit, and when the last key was placed, the entire circle lit up. Lines of colored energy began to flow between the keys, forming an ethereal map of Salem. Points of light pulsed in different locations, like stars in a terrestrial constellation. "The sacred sites," Madame Eleanor whispered, her eyes shining with emotion. "The keys are showing where the veil between the elements is thinnest, where the ancient magic is still strong." But before they could study the map more closely, the shadows in the chamber began to thicken, moving against the natural light. The map flickered and vanished, and the keys were thrown from their positions as if an invisible force had torn them away. "He is growing stronger," Madame Eleanor said, her voice tense. "Malachi senses that you are preparing. Time is running out." Emily picked up her key from the ground, noticing that the symbols now seemed slightly different, as if the brief contact with the stone circle had awakened something in them. She exchanged glances with her companions, seeing in them the same mix of determination and apprehension she felt. The training had only just begun, but the enemy was already on the move. The race to uncover the secrets of Salem and their own powers had become urgent. The following days were filled with intense training in the Sanctum of Elements. However, on that particular morning, something felt different. Emily woke with a strange sensation, as if the water in her body was restless. Upon arriving at Madame Eleanor's house, Emily found Sophia alone in the garden, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. "I couldn't sleep," Sophia confessed as Emily approached. "I had dreams about Malachi." She hesitated, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "There's something I need to tell all of you, but—" Her voice faltered as Liam and Ethan arrived, followed by Madame Eleanor. The lady paused when she saw Sophia's troubled expression. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked softly. Sophia nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. "My family," Sophia began, her voice trembling, "has an ancient connection to Malachi. He was my ancestor." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "For generations, my family carried this secret, this shame. Some believed his power ran through our veins, that we were marked by his darkness." Emily moved closer to Sophia, holding her hand in a gesture of support. Liam, however, took a step back, his hands clenching into fists. "Why didn't you tell us before?" His voice was tense, controlled. "Because she was afraid, Liam." "Madame," Eleanor interjected, "the same fear you carry about your own past." It was Liam's turn to pale. Ethan, who had been unusually quiet, looked between them with concern. "What past?" Liam ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. 3 years ago, I lost control of my power. It was a theater performance. I was working on special effects. I thought I could control fire, even without fully understanding what I was. The fire—" His voice broke. "No one was seriously hurt, but some people—" Emily gently touched his shoulder, her eyes conveying understanding. She picked up her notebook and wrote, "We all carry scars. They make us stronger." "Emily is right," Madame Eleanor said. "That's why you were chosen. Not despite your pains, but because of them. Each of you understands the weight of the power you carry." A sudden cold wind swept through the garden, causing the horse figurines to emit unsettling metallic sounds. The keys, in their pockets, began to vibrate simultaneously. "Something is happening," Ethan warned, his eyes fixed on the rapidly darkening sky. Madame Eleanor quickly guided them to the sanctum. In the central circle, the stones pulsed with a faint light, forming patterns that resembled an ancient language. "The energy lines are shifting," the lady explained, her fingers tracing the symbols. "Malachi is trying to locate something powerful." She turned to the young guardians. "There is a place in Salem, the elemental nexus, where the force of the 4 elements converges. If he finds that place before you—" A sudden tremor shook the chamber, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. The keys in their hands glowed intensely, and the ethereal map appeared again, but this time it was different. The energy lines seemed distorted, as if something was interfering with their natural flow. "Look!" Ethan pointed to a specific spot on the map. That ancient structure near St. Francis's Church, the energies are concentrating there. Emily observed the indicated location, feeling a familiar connection. Her grandmother used to talk about that region of Salem, telling stories about secret tunnels and hidden chambers beneath the stone streets. Sophia approached the map, her eyes studying the patterns. Something's wrong. These lines, they shouldn't cross like this. It's as if someone is deliberately manipulating the energies, Liam completed, his expression grim. Creating an artificial pattern. Madame Eleanor nodded gravely. Malachi is trying to force a convergence of the elements. If he succeeds, the natural balance will be broken. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The water in the environment seemed to respond to her apprehension, rippling uneasily in the sanctum's fountain. She grabbed her notebook and quickly wrote, "We need to go there." "Yes," Madame Eleanor agreed, "but you must be cautious. Together you are strong, but Malachi has centuries of experience in manipulating the elements, and he knows secrets that have been lost over time." The four guardians exchanged glances, each processing the weight of the situation. The revelations of that morning had changed the dynamic between them, but it had also created a new form of understanding. Their shared vulnerabilities, instead of weakening them, seemed to have strengthened their connection. "It doesn't matter what happened in the past," Ethan spoke, his youthful voice carrying a surprising maturity. "What matters is what we do now." Emily nodded, feeling a growing determination. The waters around her calmed, responding to her resolve. Sophia dried her tears, standing with newfound confidence. Liam took a deep breath, small flames dancing on his fingers with renewed control. As they prepared to leave, Madame Eleanor watched them with a mix of pride and concern. The shadows in the corners of the sanctum seemed to move on their own, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. The real battle was about to begin. The sun was already high when the four guardians arrived at the old building near St. Francis's Church. The structure, a two-story colonial building with peeling walls and blind windows, seemed to watch them with silent hostility. The streets around were eerily empty, as if the residents of Salem instinctively knew to avoid the place. Emily was the first to notice something strange. Small streams of water were trickling down the building's walls, despite the completely clear sky. Liam noticed that the air around was warmer than usual, creating a visual distortion, like heat. Waves over asphalt. Ethan felt air currents moving in impossible patterns, and Sophia could sense unsettling vibrations coming from underground. "The elements are in conflict," Sophia murmured, her hands pressed against one of the walls. "It's as if they're being forced to mix unnaturally." Emily took her key from her pocket, noticing how it vibrated more intensely as they approached the entrance. The symbols on its surface glowed with a pulsating blue light, like a heartbeat, in sync with the distorted energies of the place. When Liam tried to open the main door, he found it locked. However, his key began to glow more brightly, and as he brought it closer to the lock, a soft click was heard. The door slowly opened, revealing an interior shrouded in gloom. The air inside was heavy and damp, carrying a smell of wet earth and minerals. Webs of shadow danced on the walls, moving in ways that defied physics. Ethan created a small air current to dispel the darkness, revealing a large hall with an elaborately carved stone floor. "Look at this," he pointed to the ground. The floor was a complex mosaic, depicting the four elements in a circular pattern. At the center there was a depression that seemed designed to hold something. Emily approached, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Water began to flow more rapidly from the walls, forming small streams that converged toward the center of the hall. The air grew denser by the moment, and small flames began to spontaneously ignite around them. "It's a trap," Liam warned, but it was too late. A sudden, violent wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the flames and throwing the young guardians against the walls. The shadows gained substance, forming humanoid silhouettes that moved with predatory grace. In the center of the hall, a figure began to materialize, tall, imposing, made of shadows and distorted light. "Welcome, young guardians," a voice echoed, ancient and powerful. "I see that Madame Eleanor still insists on recruiting children for her lost cause." Emily felt her heart race as she recognized the presence of Malachi. Even without a fully defined form, its aura emanated an ancient and corrupted power. The elements around it responded chaotically, as if they were being tortured. "How you are disturbing the natural balance," Sophia challenged, her voice trembling slightly. "The elements were not meant to be forced in this way." A cold laugh echoed through the hall. "Balance? Balance is an illusion, created by the weak, who fear true power. The elements can be so much more with the right guidance." The humanoid shadows advanced, each emanating a different distortion of the elements. Emily realized they were corrupted manifestations of water, fire, earth, and air, perverted versions of their own powers. "Show me what you're capable of," Malachi taunted. "Prove your worth, if you can." Chaos erupted in the hall. Emily found herself battling a creature of black water that mimicked her movements. Liam faced a being of cold blue flames, while Sophia dueled with an entity made of corrupted crystals. Ethan defended himself against a cutting wind spectre that swirled around him. At first, each tried to fight individually, using their powers, as they had been trained. But the creatures were too strong, fueled by Malachi's malevolent energy. It was then that Emily noticed something crucial. The keys in their hands continued to glow, trying to align with each other. She quickly wrote something in her notebook and showed it to the others. "Together, like in the sanctum." Understanding the plan, the four guardians moved to form a circle, their backs to each other. The keys in their hands shone more intensely, creating an energy field that began to repel the shadowy creatures. "Interesting," Malachi's voice sounded again, now with a note of genuine curiosity. "Perhaps there is more to you than meets the eye." Emily felt the power flowing between them, the water responding to Liam's fire, Ethan's air dancing with Sophia's earth. The elements harmonized naturally, strengthening each other rather than cancelling out. The shadowy creatures retreated, dissolving into the darkness. Malachi's form also began to fade, but his voice remained echoing off the walls. "This was merely a test, young guardians. The true challenge lies ahead. The key to the elemental nexus is closer than you think, yet farther than you can reach." When the malevolent presence finally dissipated, the four remained silent, processing what had happened. The hall returned to normal, but something had changed. On the walls, new symbols had formed, glowing softly with their own light. "Their coordinates," Ethan realized, studying the symbols. "He wanted us to find this." "It's another test," Liam concluded, his expression serious. "He's playing with us." Emily observed the new symbols, feeling that they were somehow familiar. Her mind drifted back to the stories her grandmother used to tell, to the mentions of secret places in Salem. There was more to that town than any of them had imagined, and each revelation seemed to bring more questions than answers. Back at the sanctum, Madame Eleanor studied the symbols the young guardians had copied from the walls of the mansion. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she traced each line, each curve, her green eyes clouded with ancient memories. "They are more than coordinates," she finally spoke, her voice heavy with concern. "They are fragments of a very old story, a story your grandmother knew well, Emily." Emily, who was sitting near the water fountain, quickly stood up. Her notebook was already in her hands. "What did my grandmother know?" The elderly woman sighed deeply before continuing. "Your grandmother was more than a water guardian. She was a chronicler, someone who guarded the deepest secrets of our order. She discovered something that Malachi has been seeking for centuries." The air in the sanctum grew heavier with this revelation. Ethan, who had been practicing, his control over air currents, abruptly stopped. Liam approached, the flames of the candles dancing in response to his agitation. Sophia remained where she was, her hands pressed against one of the crystals on the wall, as if seeking answers from the earth itself. "The symbols speak of a place," Madame Eleanor continued, "a sacred site where the four elements existed in perfect harmony long before the first guardians. Your grandmother called it the heart of Salem." Emily felt a wave of emotion rush through her body. She vaguely remembered her grandmother mentioning something similar in her bedtime stories, but she had always thought they were just tales to lull her to sleep. "The heart is real," Madame Eleanor stated, as if reading her thoughts. It is a core of pure power, protected by layers upon layers of ancient magic. Your grandmother spent years studying the signs, trying to locate its entrance. And did she find it? Liam asked, his voice low and tense. Yes, and no, the woman replied enigmatically. She discovered that the heart is not in a fixed place. It moves with the energy lines of the earth, appearing only when the four elements are perfectly aligned. Emily quickly wrote in her notebook, "Is that why Malachi is forcing the elements to reveal the heart?" "Precisely," Madame Eleanor confirmed, "but there's more. Your grandmother found that the heart can only be accessed through a specific ritual, performed by guardians who are in complete harmony with each other." Sophia finally stepped away from the crystal, her expression troubled. "That's why he tested us today. He wanted to see if we were capable of working together." "Yes, but also no," the lady corrected gently. "Malachi cannot perform the ritual alone, no matter how much power he has accumulated. He needs living guardians, with a pure connection to the elements." "He needs us," Ethan concluded, his young voice heavy with understanding. A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed this information. Emily approached the central fountain, observing her reflection in the crystal-clear water. Her fingers unconsciously touched the scar on her throat, recalling the accident. That had silenced her. Had it really been an accident? As if answering her thoughts, Madame Eleanor spoke softly. "Your muteness, Emily, was no coincidence. It was a gift, though a painful one. The silence allowed you to develop a deeper connection with water than any previous guardian." The tears streaming down Emily's face transformed into small spheres of water that floated around her, reflecting the light of the crystals like tiny stars. "Each of you carries marks," the lady continued, looking at each of the young ones. Liam's trauma with fire taught him respect and control. The weight of Sophia's heritage made her stronger and more determined. Ethan's youth kept him open to possibilities others would overlook. As she spoke, the keys in her hands began to pulse with a soft light, as if responding to the truth of her words. In the central circle of the Sanctum of Elements, new symbols began to appear, glowing through the ancient stone. "The symbols from the mansion," Sophia exclaimed, stepping closer to study them. "They're different here, as if they're more complete." "They are temporal coordinates, not just spatial ones," Madame Eleanor explained. "They show not only where but when the heart will appear." Emily studied the new symbols intently, noticing how some of them resembled the stories her grandmother used to draw for her. Quickly, she wrote in her notebook, "We need to find her diaries." "Yes," the lady agreed. "Your grandmother left clues in her writings, but she hid them well. She knew they would be needed one day." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Liam questioned, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Because you weren't ready," Madame Eleanor replied simply. "Your confrontation with Malachi today proved that you are now. You not only fought together, but you trusted each other. That trust is more powerful than any magic." The shadows in the sanctum seemed to move on their own, as if reacting to the mention of the ancient corrupted guardian. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, recalling Malachi's oppressive presence in the mansion. "Time is running out," Madame Eleanor warned. "Malachi will grow stronger each day, and his attempts to force the elements will cause increasing destruction. You must find the diaries and decipher their secrets before it's too late." The four guardians exchanged glances, each feeling the weight of the responsibility they carried. The journey that had begun with a mysterious key had transformed into something much greater than themselves. It wasn't just about protecting Salem or restoring balance. It was about honoring the legacy of those who came before and ensuring a future for those who would come after. The search for Emily's grandmother's diaries began the following morning. The group decided to start at the old house where she had lived in Salem, a modest building in the oldest part of the city. Emily hadn't visited the place since her childhood, and each step toward the house made her heart beat faster. The ancient key fit perfectly into the rusted lock, as if it had been waiting years for this moment. The interior of the house was covered in a thin layer of dust, but was surprisingly well preserved. Antique furniture draped in white sheets looked like silent ghosts guarding secrets from the past. "Your grandmother kept a studio upstairs," Madame Eleanor commented, guiding the group through the living room. That's where she spent hours studying and writing. As they climbed the creaking wooden stairs, Emily noticed something strange. Small droplets of water were trickling down the walls, even though there was no sign of leakage. Liam noticed that the old candles in the candlesticks were lighting up spontaneously as they passed, and Ethan could feel unnatural currents of air moving around them. The studio was a circular room with windows in every direction, offering a panoramic view of Salem. Bookshelves filled with books lined the walls, and a large wooden table occupied the center of the space. On it, an old map of the city was pinned, marked with symbols similar to those they had found in the mansion. "Look at this," Sophia called, approaching one of the shelves. "The books, they're organized by elements." She was right. Each section of the library was subtly marked with symbols representing water, fire, earth, and air. Emily instinctively headed to the water section, her fingers gliding over the dusty spines. Something inside her seemed to resonate with those books, as if they were calling to her. "Wait," Ethan said suddenly. "Do you hear that?" A soft, almost imperceptible sound echoed through the room, like the distant chime of crystal bells. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The keys, Liam noticed. They're singing. The 4 ancient keys had begun to vibrate in their hands, emitting that crystalline sound. Emily watched as her key seemed to pull her in a specific direction, and from the movements of her companions, the same was happening to them. "It's a test," Madame Eleanor explained, her eyes shining with understanding. "Each key is responding to its guardian's element. Follow them." Guided by their keys, each of them moved to a different section of the library. Emily found in the water section a particularly old book that seemed to pulse with its own energy. When she touched it, she felt an instant connection. It was as if the water in her body responded to what was contained within those pages. The others had similar experiences. Liam found a leather-bound diary in red that emitted a gentle warmth. Sophia discovered a notebook adorned with crystals that vibrated in harmony with the earth beneath her feet. Ethan located a thin volume, whose cover seemed to move constantly, like a breeze captured on paper. When they brought the 4 volumes to the central table, something extraordinary happened. The symbols on the map began to glow, and lines of colored energy emerged between the books, forming a complex pattern that projected into the air above the table. "They are more than diaries," Madame Eleanor whispered, awestruck. "They are keys. Say themselves. Each one contains a piece of the puzzle." Emily opened her volume carefully. The pages were filled with her grandmother's elegant handwriting, but they weren't just words. There were intricate drawings, mysterious formulas, and maps within maps. Some notes seemed written in an ancient language she didn't recognize. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Sophia commented, studying her own volume. "She found connections no one else saw. Look at this. She mapped the energy lines of the earth beneath Salem. They form a specific pattern with each lunar cycle. And here," Liam pointed out in his diary, "there are records of thermal anomalies that occur at specific points in the city, moments when natural fire behaves unnaturally." Ethan, flipping through his volume, added, "She also studied wind patterns. Apparently there are air currents in Salem that don't follow the normal laws of physics." Emily watched it all, with a mix of pride and sadness. Her grandmother had dedicated her life to unraveling these mysteries, and now it was up to them to continue her work. In her own diary, she found a note that made her heart stop for a moment. "For Emily, when the time comes." Quickly she wrote in her notebook and showed it to the others. She knew this would happen. "Your grandmother was a seer as well as a chronicler," Madame Eleanor confirmed. "She could glimpse fragments of the future. That's why she prepared all of this for when you were ready." A sudden tremor shook the house, causing books to fall from the shelves. The shadows in the corners of the studio began to thicken, and the air grew heavy with a familiar presence. "He knows," Liam warned, flames dancing in his hands. "Malachi senses we've found something important." "Quickly," Madame Eleanor urged, "secure the diaries. They need to be studied safely in the sanctum. Malachi cannot lay hands on them." As they gathered the volumes, Emily noticed something curious. When brought close together, the 4 diaries seemed to form a single unit like pieces of a puzzle. On the spine of each one, silver symbols glowed in sequence, as if telling a story that was only beginning to unfold. The sanctum had transformed into an improvised library. The 4 diaries rested in the central circle, their pages emitting a soft glow that mingled with the light of the crystals. Emily, Liam, Sophia, and Ethan spent the last few hours immersed in the writings, trying to decipher the secrets left by Emily's grandmother. "Listen to this," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly as she read a passage from her diary. "The heart of Salem is not just a place of power. It is an ancient consciousness that chooses its guardians through the ages. The elements are not just forces of nature. They are extensions of this consciousness." Emily was looking at her own diary, where her grandmother had drawn intricate patterns of flowing water. In the margins of the pages, she found notes that made her heart tighten. "Emily will see beyond the silence. In water, she will find her true voice." "There's something here about the ritual," Ethan commented, leaning over his volume. "Apparently, the heart can only be accessed when the 4 elements are in perfect balance. But it's not just about power. There must be harmony among the guardians." Liam, who was studying a series of diagrams in his diary, furrowed his brow. "The problem is that Malachi knows this part. That's why he tested us. He needs to understand how we work together." Madame Eleanor, who was watching the young ones from her spot near the fountain, nodded gravely. Malachi was once an extraordinary guardian. He understood the importance of harmony but believed he could force it, control it. Emily flipped through a few more pages of her diary, stopping at a passage that caught her attention. Quickly, she wrote in her notebook and showed it to the others. "My grandmother mentions a specific moment when the full moon aligns with the stars of the Guardian constellation." "The Guardian constellation?" Ethan asked, confused. "I've never heard of it." "That's because it's only visible from Salem," Madame Eleanor explained. "It's a cluster of stars that forms a unique pattern when viewed from here. The first Guardians used it as a guide." Sophia quickly consulted her diary. "According to these notes, the next alignment will happen in 3 days. A heavy silence fell over the group. 3 days didn't seem like enough time to decipher all the secrets contained in the diaries, let alone prepare for whatever Malachi was planning. It was then that Emily noticed something strange in her diary. Some pages seemed to be stuck together. Carefully, she separated them, revealing a hidden compartment where a small crystal vial was concealed. Inside it, a silvery liquid seemed to dance on its own. "Water memories," Madame Eleanor whispered in awe. "Your grandmother managed to capture her own memories in the purest form of the element. It's an ancient technique, nearly lost." Emily held the vial with reverence, feeling it pulse in her hands like a tiny liquid heart. Her grandmother had left more than written words. She had left a part of herself, preserved through water. "But how do we access these memories?" Liam asked, eyeing the vial with curiosity. "Through the union of the elements," Madame Eleanor replied. "Water preserves memory. Fire provides the energy to release it. Earth anchors it in the present, and air allows it to manifest." The 4 guardians exchanged glances, understanding what they needed to do. They positioned themselves around the central circle, the vial of memories at its center. Emily could feel the water within her responding to her presence, eager to reveal its secrets. With a fluid motion, she made the silvery liquid levitate out of the vial. Liam added a gentle warmth, causing it to glow like living mercury. Sophia established a connection with the crystals of the sanctum, creating a stable energy field. Ethan, finally, enveloped everything in a soft current of air. The memories expanded like a silvery mist, forming 3-dimensional images in the air. The voice of Emily's grandmother, clear as if she were present, echoed through the sanctum. "My dear guardians, if you are seeing this, it means the moment I foresaw has finally arrived. The heart of Salem is in danger, and you are our last line of defense. But I must warn you, there is more at stake than you realize. Malachi seeks not only power, he is searching for something that was hidden in the heart centuries ago, something that could change the very nature of the elements." The images shifted, showing a Salem of the past. A group of guardians performed a complex ritual, hiding something within an ancient chamber. "What you need to find," the voice continued, "is marked in the very elements of the city. Each of the sacred sites holds a piece of the map that leads to the heart. But beware, Malachi also knows these places, and he has prepared traps over the centuries. The silvery mist shimmered and new images emerged, specific locations in Salem, each pulsing with elemental energy. Emily recognized some of them from her childhood memories, places her grandmother used to take her. Time is critical, her grandmother's voice warned. The alignment approaching is not ordinary. It is the same one that occurred when the heart was first sealed. If Malachi succeeds in obtaining what he seeks... The voice faltered for a moment. The consequences would be catastrophic. The final words of the message were directed straight to Emily. My dear granddaughter, your silence is your greatest strength. In water, you will find not only your voice, but also the key to uniting the Guardians. Trust your heart, it knows the way. The silvery mist slowly dissipated, leaving the sanctum in a silence heavy with meaning. Emily felt silent tears stream down her face, transforming into small spheres of water that floated around her like liquid stars. Now we know why Malachi is so determined, Madame Eleanor said softly. He has waited centuries for this specific alignment. But what exactly is hidden in the heart? Ethan asked, his young voice filled with concern. Whatever it is, Liam replied, we can't let him find it. We have 3 days to uncover all the sacred sites and stop him. Emily nodded, determined. In her heart, she felt that every word from her grandmother had been carefully chosen, every clue left with purpose. Now it was up to them to solve the puzzle before it was too late. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching from, and let's continue. The next morning found the Elemental Guardians ready for their first mission. After carefully studying the diaries and the revealed memories, they had identified the first sacred site they needed to visit. The ancient fountain of the cathedral, one of the oldest points in Salem. The fountain isn't just a fountain, Madame Eleanor explained as they walked through the still deserted streets of the town. It was built over a natural convergence point of underground water. The first Guardians used it as an observation post. Emily could feel the energy of the place even before they arrived. The water flowing through the ancient fountain seemed to sing a melody only she could hear, calling to her like a familiar voice. Her steps grew lighter as they approached, as if her own element was guiding her. There's something different in the air, Ethan commented, his hands moving gently to feel the invisible currents. It's as if the molecules themselves are dancing. Sophia knelt, touching the stone ground around the fountain. The earth is vibrating too. There are patterns here, ancient ones, very ancient. Liam observed everything carefully, noticing how small flames spontaneously appeared on the sides of the fountain, only to extinguish moments later. It's as if the elements are talking to each other. Emily approached the water, her fingers gently touching the crystalline surface. At the moment of contact, a wave of energy surged through her body, and images began to form in her mind, ancient memories preserved by the water itself. Quickly, she grabbed her notebook and wrote, "The fountain holds memories, I can see them through the water." "Use your gift," Madame Eleanor encouraged. "Let the water tell its story." Focusing, Emily delved deeper into her connection with the element. The water in the fountain began to move unnaturally, forming small whirlpools that reflected the light of the rising sun in impossible ways. In the ripples, images of the past began to take shape. The others watched in awe as the story unfolded before them. They saw the first Guardians performing rituals around the fountain, using it as a portal to communicate with the heart of Salem. They saw how they hid something deep within the water, a crystal that pulsed with its own light. "The first fragment of the map," Sophia whispered, recognizing the object from the descriptions in the diaries. But then the images shifted, showing something more recent. Emily's grandmother, years earlier, visiting the fountain at night. She had done something with the crystal, altering its location and adding extra protections. She knew Malachi would come looking, Liam realized. She reinforced the defenses. Emily nodded, feeling a new understanding of her grandmother's actions. Every move had been calculated, every protection set with a specific purpose. Now it was up to them to complete her work. The water in the fountain began to churn more intensely, responding to the presence of the 4 guardians. The keys in their pockets vibrated in unison, as if recognizing the sacred place. "It's a test," Madame Eleanor said. "The spring will demand that you prove your worth as guardians before revealing its secrets." No sooner had she finished speaking than the water from the spring rose into the air, forming 4 liquid pillars that surrounded the youths. Each pillar began to manifest different characteristics. One burned like liquid fire, another glowed with microscopic crystals, the third swirled like an aquatic tornado, and the last seemed to contain the full force of the ocean. "The elements in their purest form," Madame Eleanor explained. "You must prove that you can work in harmony with them." Emily was the first to understand what they needed to do. With fluid gestures, she began to interact with her water pillar, not trying to control it, but dancing with it, allowing the water to guide her movements as much as she guided the water. The others followed her example. Liam found the rhythm of the liquid fire, letting its heat flow through him without burning. Sophia connected with the crystals in the water, creating patterns that reflected the very structure of the earth. Ethan allowed the aquatic tornado to teach him about the invisible currents of the air. As they worked, the pillars began to move in unison, intertwining in a complex dance. At the center of the pattern they formed, something began to glow in the depths of the spring, the crystal they had seen in the watery memories. Emily felt her heart race. This was only the first of the sacred places they needed to visit, and it already demanded so much from them. How much harder would the next challenges be, and how much time did they have before Malachi discovered what they were doing? As if in response to her thoughts, the shadows around the spring seemed to deepen for a moment, and a cold breeze swept through the area. The guardians exchanged glances, aware that they were not alone in their quest. The race against time had begun, and every move needed to be precise. The crystal recovered from the ancient spring now rested at the center of the Sanctum of Elements, its light pulsing in a rhythm reminiscent of a beating heart. Emily watched it intently, trying to decipher the patterns moving within it, like flowing water captured in glass. "Each fragment of the map is a different test," Madame Eleanor explained, consulting the notes in the journals. "The next one is hidden in the ruins of the old church, where the element of fire is strongest." Liam, who had been practicing his control over small flames, stopped abruptly, his face visibly paled. "The ruins, that's where the incident happened 3 years ago." A heavy silence fell over the group. Emily approached Liam, placing a hand on his shoulder in silent support. She, more than anyone, understood the weight of carrying painful memories. "Maybe that's why the fragment is there," Sophia suggested gently. "There are no coincidences when it comes to the elements." Ethan, who had been unusually quiet, added, "Just as Emily's muteness connected her more deeply with water, perhaps your trauma with fire is part of your path as a guardian, Liam." Emily grabbed her notebook and quickly wrote, "We don't have to face our fears alone. We're in this together." Liam took a deep breath, small sparks dancing on his fingertips. "You're right. I can't let the past stop me from doing what needs to be done." The group prepared to leave, but before they could go, Madame Eleanor stopped them. "Wait, there's something you need to know about the ruins." She opened one of the journals, showing a page with detailed drawings of the site. The fire that destroyed the original church decades ago wasn't natural. It was Malachi trying to access the power hidden there. "So the fire I caused," Liam began, his voice trembling. "It wasn't a coincidence," Madame Eleanor confirmed. "Malachi has the power to influence the elements, especially in sacred places. He might have amplified your connection to fire that day without you realizing it." This revelation hit the group like a wave. Sophia instinctively touched the crystals on her necklace, as if seeking comfort in the solidity of the earth. Ethan created a gentle breeze around them, trying to ease the tension in the air. Emily watched her companions, noticing how each of them carried their own scars, visible or not. In her heart, she felt that this made them stronger, not weaker. Their wounds were bridges to a deeper understanding of their elements. The group set out for the ruins as the sun began to set, painting the sky of Salem with shades of red and orange that seemed particularly intense that evening. The partially destroyed walls of the old church rose against the horizon like silent sentinels of a past that refused to be forgotten. As they approached, the temperature around them began to rise. The air shimmered with waves of heat that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The keys in their pockets vibrated with increasing intensity, responding to the energy of the place. "The stones," Sophia murmured, touching one of the walls. "They hold memories of the fire. I can feel them through the earth." Ethan furrowed, his brow concentrating. There's something strange about the air currents. They're converging on a specific point. Emily could feel it too. There was moisture in the air, but it behaved unnaturally, as if being drawn to the same spot Ethan had noticed. She pointed to a specific area among the ruins where the elements seemed to converge. Liam stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. "It's there. The original altar of the church was right at that spot." As they moved closer, the shadows around them seemed to gain substance, moving in ways that defied physics. The air grew thicker, charged with an ancient energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. "He's here," Madame Eleanor whispered. "Malachi. His presence is stronger in this place." As if in confirmation, the shadows began to condense, forming a tall and imposing figure. The voice that echoed through the ruins was the same one they had heard in the mansion, but now it carried a tone of dark amusement. "Welcome to the site of your first great failure, young fire guardian," Malachi addressed Liam. "Did you never wonder why your flames were so hard to control that day? Why they seemed to have a will of their own?" Liam stepped forward, his hands now steady. "You may have used me that day, but you won't manipulate me again." A cold laugh echoed through the ruins. "Manipulate? I merely awakened what was already within you. The true power of fire should not be controlled. It should be set free." Emily noticed the shadows moving around them, trying to separate them from one another. With a quick gesture, she created a barrier of water that kept the group together. "Ah, the silent young guardian." Malachi turned his attention to Emily. "So much like your grandmother. She too believed she could stop me. But even the strongest, water can evaporate under the right heat." The conflict was about to begin, and everyone knew this would be different from their first encounter. This time, Malachi wasn't just testing them, he was determined to stop them from recovering. The second fragment of the map. The air in the old church ruins crackled with elemental energy. The shadows cast by Malachi danced around the group like black flames, while the sky above grew darker shades of red. "Do you truly believe you can recover the fragment?" Malachi's voice echoed, seeming to come from all directions. "The fire here answers only to me now." As if to prove his point, circles of blue flames erupted around them, the fire twisting into impossible shapes. The heat was intense, but there was something wrong with it. It was an unnatural heat, one that seemed to suck the very life from the air. Emily maintained her water barrier, but she could feel it rapidly evaporating under the growing heat. Through the forming mist, she saw Liam grappling with his own internal conflict. His hands trembled as he watched the flames, painful memories clearly reflected in his eyes. "Don't let him get into your head," Sophia shouted to Liam, using her powers to stabilize the ground beneath their feet, which was beginning to crack from the heat. "Fire is your element, not his." Ethan worked frantically to keep the air breathable around them, creating a current that dispersed the toxic smoke beginning to form. "We need to find the fragment before he destroys everything." Emily observed the pattern of the blue flames and realized something important. Quickly, she wrote in her notebook and showed the others. "The flames are protecting something. Look, at how they move. They're focused on a specific point." Liam focused his attention where Emily pointed, and his eyes widened in understanding. "The altar. The fragment must be buried beneath it." Anhanguera's laughter echoed once more. "Very observant, but getting there will be interesting." With a gesture, the blue flames intensified, forming an impenetrable barrier. It was then that Emily had an idea. She touched Liam's shoulder and quickly wrote, "Fire can be controlled in two ways, by smothering it or by feeding it until it consumes itself." Liam frowned for a moment, then his eyes sparkled with understanding. "Ethan, Sophia, we need you. Emily, keep the protection around us. As Emily strengthened her water barrier, the other three positioned themselves strategically. Ethan began creating a vortex of air, making the blue flames spin faster and faster. Sophia used her powers to extract minerals from the ground, creating a fine dust that mixed with the air. Liam closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in his gaze. Extending his hands, he began feeding the blue flames with his own fire, not trying to fight them, but instead synchronizing with them, like a conductor leading a chaotic orchestra. "What are you doing?" Anhanguera's voice carried a note of concern for the first time. The blue flames began to spin faster, fueled by Liam's fire and Ethan's vortex. Sophia's mineral dust, mixed with the air, created a spectacle of colors as the flames consumed more and more oxygen. Emily watched in awe as the plan worked. The blue flames, overfed and spinning at an impossible speed, began to consume themselves rapidly. In a matter of seconds, they extinguished completely, leaving only a circle of glowing ashes. "Impossible!" Anhanguera roared, his shadowy form trembling with fury. But they had no time to celebrate. Emily immediately directed her water to the site of the ancient altar, using it to quickly cool the stones. Sophia, sensing the structure through the earth, identified a small hidden cavity. "There!" she pointed. Liam, still breathing heavily from the effort of controlling the flames, approached the spot. His hands, still warm from the power of fire, touched the ancient stones. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the stones began to glow with an inner heat, responding to the touch of the true fire guardian. A small opening formed, revealing a red crystal that pulsed like a live ember. When Liam picked it up, the crystal glowed more intensely, recognizing its rightful guardian. "This isn't over." Anhanguera's voice sounded more distant now, his form dissipating like smoke in the wind. "You may have passed this test, but there are others, and not all will be so straightforward." When the dark presence finally dissipated, the group allowed themselves to relax a little. Emily approached Liam, who was observing the crystal in his hands with a complex expression. "You did it," Sophia smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You faced your fear and proved yourself a true guardian." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "The way you controlled the flames was incredible. You didn't fight them, you danced with them," Emily wrote in her notebook. "Sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths." Liam smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you, all of you. I could never have done it alone." Madame Eleanor, who had been silently observing everything, finally spoke. "This was only the second test, and Malachi is already showing more of his power. The next ones will be even more challenging." The group looked up at the sky, which was beginning to brighten again. They had obtained 2 of the map fragments, but time was running out. The celestial alignment was approaching, and there was still much to uncover. The third sacred site was a small natural cave, hidden on the outskirts of Salem. The crystals recovered from the spring, and the ruins glowed softly in Emily and Liam's hands as the group approached the entrance, partially covered by vegetation. "This is the oldest site of all," Madame Eleanor explained, her voice reverent. "The first inhabitants of this land already considered it sacred, long before the city existed." Sophia approached the cave entrance, her fingers delicately touching the rock formations. Her face showed a mix of emotions, anxiety, recognition, and something deeper, more personal. "I can feel it," she murmured. "The memories of the land, here's they're different, older, more familiar." She hesitated before continuing. "Malachi has been here many times. The land bears the scars of his presence." Emily watched her friend with concern. Since the revelation about her ancestral connection to Malachi, Sophia seemed to carry an even greater burden. Quickly, she wrote in her notebook, "Your actions are not defined by your blood." "Emily is right," Ethan added, creating a gentle breeze that made the leaves dance around them. "You choose your own path." Liam, who still radiated a faint warmth after his victory in the ruins, nodded in agreement. "Your ancestors may have marked the path, but the steps are yours." Sophia took a deep breath, a small smile appearing on her lips. The crystals in her necklace glowed in response to her renewed determination. "Let's go in. The fragment is calling." "Us?" The interior of the cave was a natural spectacle of colors and lights. Crystals of various hues emerged from the walls, some so ancient they seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The light they emitted created intricate patterns on the rocky floor, like a forgotten language trying to tell its story. Emily noticed how the humidity of the place formed small underground streams, their sounds creating a soft melody that echoed off the walls. Liam kept a small floating flame to light their way, the shadows dancing in an almost hypnotic manner. As they ventured deeper into the cave, the air grew denser with elemental energy. Ethan had to constantly adjust the air currents to keep it breathable. The keys in his pockets vibrated with increasing intensity, responding to the ancient magic of the place. "Look!" Ethan pointed to a specific formation of crystals. "They form a pattern, like a constellation." It was true. The crystals on the wall aligned in a way that perfectly replicated the Guardian constellation they had seen in the diaries. At the center of the pattern, a natural cavity seemed to be waiting for something. Sophia approached the E formation, her eyes gleaming with the reflection of the crystals. "It's here. The fragment is hidden within the rock itself." But before they could get any closer, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The crystals in the walls pulsed with a more intense light, and shadows began to form in the corners of the cave. "Welcome to my ancient home," Malachi's voice echoed through the crystalline walls, each surface reflecting a different fragment of his dark presence. "Sophia, my young descendant, you must feel the connection to this place. The power that runs through your veins is the same that flows through these stones." Sophia stood firm, though Emily could see her hands trembling slightly. "You have no power over me, Malachi, not anymore." A cold laugh reverberated through the cave. "Power? You don't understand, child. This isn't about power. It's about heritage, about destiny." The crystals in the walls began to vibrate at a disturbing frequency. Small cracks appeared on the ground, releasing a dark vapor that seemed alive. "The earth holds memories," Malachi continued, his voice now coming from all directions. "Memories of power, of glories, and of betrayal. Do you want to see what happened to the last guardians who tried to stop me?" The shadows condensed, forming three-dimensional images, scenes of ancient battles, of clashing elements, of fallen guardians. Emily realized it was a tactic to destabilize them emotionally, especially Sophia. But something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating, Sophia stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an inner light that rivaled the crystals around her. "You're right about one thing, Malachi," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The earth does hold memories, but you forgot that it holds all of them, including your failures." With a fluid motion, Sophia touched the cave wall. The crystals responded instantly, their light shifting in color. The shadows projected by Malachi began to show new scenes, moments of his own defeat, times when balance prevailed over his ambition. "Impossible," Malachi's voice thundered, but there was a note of uncertainty in his tone. "How did you—" "The earth does not lie," Sophia replied, her confidence growing, "and it recognizes its true guardians." The other three positioned themselves around Sophia, their keys glowing in unison. Emily created a barrier of water that reflected and amplified the light of the crystals. Liam fueled that light with his fire, while Ethan used the air to direct the combined energy. The entire cave seemed to vibrate with ancient power. The crystals on the wall where the fragment was hidden began to move, revealing a small natural chamber. Inside it, an emerald-green crystal pulsed like a living heart. When Sophia touched the crystal, a wave of energy swept through the cave, dispersing the last shadows of Malachi. For a moment, everyone could feel the true essence of the place, not a site of darkness and corruption, but a sanctuary of balance and harmony. "You've won this battle, young guardian." Malachi's voice sounded distant now, almost a whisper. "But remember, blood does not lie, and yours still sings to me." When silence finally returned to the cave, Sophia held the crystal with reverence. Silent tears streamed down her face, but there was a smile on her lips. "You did it," Madame Eleanor said softly. Not only did you recover the fragment, but you also freed yourself from the weight of your past. Emily embraced her friend, feeling as if the air itself seemed lighter now. In her heart, she knew that each trial wasn't just about recovering the fragments of the map. It was about each of them facing their deepest fears and emerging stronger. The fourth and final sacred site was the most challenging of all, the summit of St. Joseph's Peak, where the air was so thin it made breathing difficult for anyone who wasn't an air guardian. The group had begun their ascent before dawn, with Ethan leading the way. The fragment of air is the most elusive, Madame Eleanor explained as they climbed. Just like the element itself, it cannot truly be contained, only understood. The three crystals they had already recovered glowed within their respective guardians, blue with Emily, red with Liam, and green with Sophia. Their combined lights created intricate patterns in the morning air, like a miniature aurora borealis. Ethan, though the youngest, displayed a surprising confidence as they neared the summit. The wind around him seemed to sing, crafting melodies only he could fully comprehend. "There's something different in the air here," he remarked, pausing. "For a moment. It's as if the wind itself is waiting for something." Emily could feel it too. There was an anticipation in the air, an energy that made the water within her vibrate in anticipation. She noticed how tiny dewdrops floated around them, suspended in invisible air currents. When they finally reached the top of the peak, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with impossible colors. The view of Salem below was breathtaking, the historic town looking like a miniature painting wrapped in the morning mist. "It's here," Ethan said, his voice blending with the whistle of the wind. "The fragment is in the air itself." Before anyone could question how that was possible, the wind began to shift. The once gentle air current started moving in increasingly complex patterns, forming visible vortices that danced around the group. "The winds are telling a story," Ethan explained, his eyes shining with understanding. "About the first air guardian, who learned to see the invisible." Emily noticed how her friend seemed different now, more mature, more connected to his element. The insecure boy she had met just days ago was transforming before her eyes. But then, as they had expected, the shadows began to form. The wind took on an icy tone, and Malachi's voice echoed through the air like distant thunder. "The youngest of the guardians," he said, his dark presence materializing in the air like black smoke. "So full of potential, and so easy to manipulate." Ethan, however, showed no fear. "You cannot manipulate what you do not understand, Malachi. And you never truly understood the air." The ancient guardian's laughter echoed across the peak. "I don't understand. I mastered all the elements. Watch." With a gesture, he created a tornado of shadows that began to suck all the air around them, creating a vacuum that threatened to suffocate the group. Emily quickly formed a barrier of water to protect them, while Liam and Sophia used their elements to strengthen the defense. But Ethan remained calm. With a serene smile, he closed his eyes and extended his hands. "The air cannot be dominated," he said softly. "He can only be danced with." And then, to everyone's astonishment, Ethan began to literally dance. His movements were fluid and graceful, as if performing a choreography rehearsed with the wind itself. The air currents responded to every gesture, every step, creating a visual symphony of movement and light. The shadow tornado of Malachi began to lose strength, its dark currents unraveled by Ethan's harmonious dance. The young guardian was creating something new, not a battle of elements, but a celebration of them. What are you doing?" Malachi's voice sounded confused for the first time. "I'm listening," Ethan replied simply, continuing his dance. "Something you forgot how to do a long time ago." The other three guardians instinctively understood what they needed to do. Emily allowed her water to join the aerial dance, creating rainbows that floated in the air. Liam added small flames that spun like fireflies around them. Sophia made tiny crystals float in the air currents, reflecting the light of the rising sun in thousands of colors. At the center of that elemental celebration, something began to form. A condensation of light and air that gradually took the shape of a translucent crystal, floating and spinning as if made of the wind itself. Ethan reached out, and the crystal flew gently to his hand, its glow pulsing in sync with the young guardian's heartbeat. Malachai's shadows retreated, his presence diminishing. "Impossible. You didn't fight." "Because some battles don't need to be fought," Ethan replied, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "Some just need to be danced." When the dark presence finally dissipated, the sun had fully risen, bathing the peak of the mountain in golden light. The 4 fragments of the map, now reunited, shone in harmony, creating patterns of light that projected into the air like a web of pure energy. "The map is complete," Madame Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. "But we only have a few hours until the celestial alignment." Emily observed the glowing crystals, each representing not just an element, but a personal journey of discovery and overcoming. In her heart, she knew the real battle was just beginning. The heart of Salem awaited them, and with it, the final confrontation with Malachi. The 4th and final sacred site was the most challenging of all, the summit of St. Joseph's Peak, where the air was so thin it made breathing difficult for anyone who wasn't an air guardian. The group had begun their ascent before dawn, with Ethan leading the way. "The fragment of air is the most elusive," Madame Eleanor explained as they climbed. "Like the element itself, it cannot truly be contained, only understood." The 3 recovered crystals glowed in their respective guardians, blue with Emily, red with Liam, and green with Sophia. Their combined lights created intricate patterns in the morning air, like a miniature aurora borealis. Ethan, though the youngest, showed surprising confidence as they approached the summit. The wind around him seemed to sing, creating melodies only he could fully comprehend. "There's something different in the air here," he commented, pausing for a moment. "It's as if the wind itself were waiting for something." Emily could feel it too. There was an anticipation in the air, an energy that made the water in her body vibrate with excitement. She watched as tiny droplets of dew floated around them, suspended in invisible air currents. When they finally reached the top of the peak, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with impossible colors. The view of Salem below was breathtaking, the historic town looking like a miniature painting wrapped in the morning mist. "It's here," Ethan said, his voice blending with the whistle of the wind. "The fragment is in the air itself." Before anyone could question how that was possible, the wind began to change. The once gentle air currents started moving in increasingly complex patterns, forming visible vortices that danced around the group. "The winds are telling a story," Ethan explained, his eyes gleaming with understanding. "About the first air guardian who learned to see the invisible." Emily noticed how her friend seemed different now, more mature, more connected to his element. The insecure boy she had met just a few days ago was transforming before her eyes. But then, as they had expected, the shadows began to form. The wind took on an icy tone, and Malachi's voice echoed through the air like distant thunder. "The youngest of the guardians," he said, his dark presence materializing in the air like black smoke. "So full of potential, and so easy to manipulate." Ethan, however, showed no fear. "You can't manipulate what you don't understand, Malachi, and you never truly understood the air." The ancient guardian's laughter echoed across the peak. "I don't understand. I mastered all the elements. Watch!" With a gesture, he created a tornado of shadows that began to suck all the air around them, creating a vacuum that threatened to suffocate the group. "The heart of Salem," he continued, his voice almost reverent. "The place where the elements first met, where the oldest magic still lives. And you, young guardians, kindly brought me to him." Emily realized with a shiver that he was right. They had unwittingly opened the path for him. But before despair could take hold, she felt something different in the water flowing through the chamber walls. Not fear, but music. It was as if the water itself was singing, a melody that resonated in her silent heart. And she wasn't alone. The fire in the columns danced to the same rhythm, the earth vibrated with the same frequency, and the air carried the invisible notes. "You're wrong, Malachi," Ethan spoke, his voice young but firm. "We didn't bring you here. The heart brought us all. Malachi laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the chamber. "And will that make any difference? I've spent centuries studying this place, its secrets, its power. What can 4 inexperienced youths do? Against me?" "Something you've forgotten how to do," Sophia replied, stepping forward. "Listen." With a gesture from Malachi, shadows began to materialize around them, taking on monstrous forms. But the young guardians did not retreat. Instead, each took their position around the central pedestal. Emily, finally understanding the meaning of her silence, let the music of the water guide her movements. Liam allowed the fire to dance through him, not against him. Sophia felt the pulse of the earth as her own heartbeat, and Ethan let the wind sing in his soul. The fragments of the map in their hands began to glow with a light that outshone even Malachi's shadows. When they placed them on the pedestal, exactly as the Guardian constellation aligned perfectly above them, something extraordinary happened. The entire chamber began to pulse with light and energy. The elements, water, fire, earth, and air, began to dance in perfect harmony, creating a symphony of pure power that made reality itself vibrate. "No!" Malachi shouted, realizing too late what was happening. "The power should have been mine." But the power belonged to no one. It was the very essence of balance, the eternal dance of the elements in harmony. And the young guardians, in their journey of self-discovery, had learned not to control this power, but to become part of it. Emily felt a deep connection with her companions, as if their elements were intertwining into a cosmic tapestry of light and energy. And then, in her heart, she heard a voice she immediately recognized. Her grandmother. "True power," the voice whispered, "has always been in the silence between the notes, the space between the elements, the love between the guardians." With this understanding, Emily raised her hands, and the water responded not just to her, but to the harmony that existed among all of them. The others did the same, their elements uniting in a dance of power that transcended normal comprehension. Malachi, for the first time in centuries, felt fear. The shadows that made up his form began to disperse, consumed by the pure light emanating from the united young guardians. What have you done?" he asked, his voice faltering. "We didn't fight," Ethan replied, repeating his words from the top of the peak. "We danced." The light intensified, filling every corner of the chamber. When it finally dimmed, Malachi had vanished, not destroyed, but transformed. In the place where he had stood, a small black crystal rested, purified by the light of harmony. The heart of Salem pulsed one last time, and the young guardians felt its gratitude, not just for protecting its power, but for rediscovering its true purpose. Emily looked at her friends, tears of joy streaming down her face. In her heart, she needed no words to express what she felt. The silence, which had once been her prison, had become her greatest gift, allowing her to hear the music that had always been there, the eternal harmony of the elements. Madame Eleanor, watching her young guardians, smiled with pride. "This is not an end," she said softly. "It is only the beginning of your true journey." And so, under the stars of the Guardian constellation, 4 young individuals who had started as strangers emerged as a family, united not only by their duty as guardians, but by the strongest bond of all, the love born of true understanding. The heart of Salem would continue to beat, its power now protected not by spells or barriers, but by the living balance that existed among its guardians. And in the streets of the historic city, people would notice a subtle change, as if the city itself were more alive, more awake, its elements dancing in a harmony that, though invisible to most, could be felt by all who lived there. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching from, and we'll continue